Welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show, and thank you for joining me for another episode of this TJPS special series, Rising Political Stars. Our guest today is Sylvia Wright. She is running to be the next state superintendent of education here in South Carolina. This is an interview I'm very excited for, and you should definitely be excited for and tuned in to watch the whole episode here. I'm definitely looking forward to this. This interview essentially comes at a time when education is under attack here in South Carolina, but also broadly across the nation. And it's something that has been happening for a while, but has become enhanced in this decade. And it is a story about organization, and it's a story about a concerted effort to not only eviscerate the structure of public education in the United States, but also make it more difficult for students to learn and for students to access material that is going to enhance their intellectual abilities. And it's a story that I feel a lot of people get lost in terms of how to tell, but it is not a story that is recent history. It is a story that goes a little bit farther back, and it has a purpose, and it is inextricably connected to where we are now. It was in 1980 that Ronald Reagan launched his campaign for president of the United States. He was a relatively popular rising political star on the right, a conservative from California and a former actor. The incumbent president at the time was Jimmy Carter, and the year prior, in 1979, Carter had fulfilled a campaign promise to the National Education Association by creating a Department of Education. He had promised the NEA that he would do this before he left office, and he made sure to deliver on it. It was a huge legislative achievement for the Carter administration, given the highly unpopular and devastating Iran hostage crisis, causing international turmoil and almost certain political demise. So this was a huge deal, sending lots of positive press to the Carter administration. He called it, quote, a significant milestone in my effort to make the federal government more effective. We will now have a single cabinet department which can provide the coherence and sense of direction needed to manage billions of dollars in U.S. education funds. So the president was very optimistic about this. He was excited that he had fulfilled his promise to the National Education Association, the teachers that were heavily backing him in the Democratic convention for him to become president of the United States. But the only problem was that this measure was not favored by everyone. And when it was time to run for re-election, Ronald Reagan, his Republican opponent, used that against him. He used the fact that this was relatively controversial. Quote, at 11:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sunday, President Jimmy Carter's new bureaucratic bondoogle was born, the Department of Education. I kid you not, he really used the word bondoogle. This was not a typo. But ultimately, the election did not go well for Carter, and Reagan won the presidency by a resounding landslide. It wasn't even close. And when Reagan took office, he began a vehement and persistent tirade against the Department of Education, seeking to get rid of it and to do everything possible to make that happen. His first pick to be education secretary was a man named Terrell H. Bell, a lifelong teacher, former school administrator. Seems like a pretty straightforward guy, right? But wait, there's a catch. Although he was a champion of education, he did not support the very department he was tasked to represent. And because his views aligned with Reagan's, it was strategically the best candidate for the job. But even though, Reagan nominated Bell for this position, Bell still gets attacked by the far right because he agreed to take this position in the first place. It's almost like they're like, no, this is so counterintuitive to what we elected you to do because we just need you to get rid of the Department of Education. But that's not how the government works. The president cannot just snap his fingers and the Department of Education is gone. He has to go through Congress first. But that's really how they saw it at this point. I mean, conservatives in this moment, they really saw it as the federal government should play no role in education. I mean, Reagan even talks about this on the campaign trail, saying that, matters as it relates to welfare and education should be left to the states. The government should have no responsibility. He says we need to return education and the vicious bureaucracy to the states. So this would be a consistent heated debate between established bureaucrats and a conservative administration persistent and hell-bent on annihilating its whole foundation. In 1982, the New York Times featured a story on this battle with the headline that read, quote, "The Reagan Effect." The United States Department of Education has been in death row ever since Ronald Reagan became president, but Congress continues to stay its execution. As its fate hangs in the balance, friends and foes push in opposite directions, supporters hoping to keep it alive until a Democratic administration gives it a more active role. The opponents let the axe fall while Mr. Reagan is in the White House. The Times then poses the question, what will become of this department that has been mirrored in politics from its birth? Representative Jack Brooks, the Texas Democrat who was the chairman of the Government Operations Committee at the time, he was quoted on the record, essentially opposing the dismantling of the department. He says here, quote, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." So on the campaign trail, Reagan is committed to getting rid of DOE, and he's nearly 2 years into office at this point, and he's just struggling to kill it. He's facing opposition in Congress. People are against this. By 1983, the administration releases a report called A Nation at Risk. Essentially, this fear-mongering report as a last-ditch effort to be the assistant in the anti-Department of Education campaign. Essentially, this report, Nation at Risk, calls into question whether American schools were actually adequately preparing students for the workforce as well or better than foreign countries were, because we're in the middle of a Cold War. They also recommended a longer school day and a more extensive school year. When the report was released, Bell, the Secretary of Education at the time, had a more concentrated role in the department, and he actually wanted to start doing something meaningful and proactive instead of making chaos for its demise. But when Reagan started, cutting funding from the department, really trying to shut down the DOE, Bell, of course, who started to take his role more seriously, just resigns. His resignation came 6 days after Christmas. December 31st, 1984. And it was a month later, this is after Ronald Reagan wins a decisive victory in re-election against Walter Mondale, that they just completely give up. There was so much resistance and congressional pushback that finally, after 4 long, exhausting years of incessantly seeking its destruction, they just relented. This was the headline at the Los Angeles Times on January 29th, 1985, quote, "Education Department won't be abolished. Reagan backs down, citing little support for killing agency." President Reagan cited little congressional support, will not recommend closing down the Education Department, a major goal when he took office in 1981. It was revealed today. Quote, "I have no intention of recommending the abolition of the department to the Congress at this time," Reagan said in a letter to Senator Orrin Hatch, Republican chairman of the Senate Labor and Human Resources Committee. End quotes. So Reagan finally backs off and leaves DOE alone. He says, okay, I acknowledge that nothing is going to happen here. I give in. Fine. The agency will just stay. This whole anti-DOE campaign was just over after 4 years. After demanding his party in Congress follow his agenda and appointing an individual whose sole purpose was to eviscerate the agency, make it dysfunctional, Reagan finally has to give up the fight. But it begs the question, why was he so persistent? Why was he so intent on doing this? It was because of these guys. His pals at the Heritage Foundation, which benefited richly from his 2-term presidency. Shortly after Ronald Reagan won the 1980 election, They approached him and presented a 3,000-page report. And what lied in those pages was a 20-volume package on how to swing the government as far as right as possible and how to implement that plan expeditiously. They really were not afraid to tell the new president-elect that he wasn't conservative enough. So they gave him a plan on how to instill conservatism in every part, in every fabric, in every corner of the US government. And an imperative part of that mission was eliminating the Department of Education. Because to them, that was government overreach. That was, federal bureaucracy doing absolutely too much. The Heritage Foundation was deeply involved in the Reagan administration and wrote a whole report on how to enforce what they proposed. It was in 2023 that same organization that presented this report to Reagan, they produced their next big one, Project 2025, effectively 1980 on steroids. And again, they were not shy about this. Despite trying to distance themselves from it, the Trump campaign was supportive of it and employed several authors of the report when they took office. In June of last year, they picked this woman, Lindsey Burke, to join the Department of Education as Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Programs. Who was it that wrote the education section of Project 2025 again? Oh yeah, right. It was Lindsey Burke. And how did that chapter go? Quote, bureaucrats at the Department of Education inject racist, anti-American, ahistorical propaganda into America's classrooms. Federal education policy should be limited, and ultimately the federal Department of Education should be eliminated. Families and students do not need a Department of Education to learn, grow, and improve their lives. It is critical that the next administration tackle this entrenched infrastructure. End quote. Lindsey Burke wrote that in Project 2025, and now she is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Programs at the Department of Education. Her boss is aligned with her goal to eviscerate the agency in which she is in charge of because she's just a former WWE executive with no education experience. And also, by the way, she and her husband were sued for child sex abuse, including allegations that they knew an employee at WWE was molesting children and enabled that behavior anyway. These are the people that are running the Department of Education and are seeking to shut it down. Of course, the president cannot just unilaterally close the Department of Education per executive order. It's something that Congress has to agree on. But just like the 1980s, they are trying persistently to make it happen. And so being a superintendent right now is a very critical role because there is such a wide-scale uncertainty and lack of faith in the federal education department right now. How can you best prepare your state for the closing of the Department of Education? What steps should you be taking right now to ensure that your students have the resources they need to still succeed even when the federal government is no longer helping? I mean, these are essential questions right now because look at what they are trying to do. Look at what they are trying to do to the Department of Education. Just gutting the special needs section, making it so as that the civil rights section no longer functions in a way that it actually is supposed to do what it was designed and created to do. It's important to ask the questions as it pertains to superintendent races, state superintendent of education races in your state. Who's running? What experience do they have? And who are they aligned with? In South Carolina right now, the current state superintendent of education is Ellen Weaver. She's a Republican. She was elected in 2022. She also somehow acquired her master's degree in just 6 months. apparently, she acquired her master's degree in 6 months. As asinine and nonsensical as that sounds, she acquired her master's degree in 6 months after learning that every state superintendent must have one. She did this just in time for the election, and the school that she received it from was criticized for its role in fast tracking the degree to Weaver. As if that doesn't already call into question her legitimacy and seriousness, it's also worth looking at who she aligns herself with. Check this out. This is from 2024. Great meeting today of our National Council of Conservative State Leaders. This stellar group is working tirelessly to empower parents and restore excellence to K through 12 education. Do you notice anybody in this picture? Look very, very closely. Yep, that is Lindsay Burke and Ellen Weaver. Yes, it is. She is standing proudly with the author of the education section in Project 2025, which calls for the elimination of the Department of Education, which would make Ellen Weaver's job as state superintendent in South Carolina and just all superintendents of education in multiple states across the country, it would make their job diametrically more difficult. And it would make it difficult for students as well. I mean, consider the impact of this. But in addition to this, Weaver is also very supportive of the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, the individual that is tasked right now with destroying her own agency. The goal of conservatives for years has not only been to get rid of the Department of Education and return education to the states, but it is also to intentionally make that system worse, to make the system that is already not working for so many, to make the current imperfect education system, make it worse, but specifically for public schools. They are making private schools appear more enticing and exempting them from the same rules that public schools are told to follow. It's a system that is pro-vouchers and inundating tons of money into religious private institutions. Conservatives have embraced culture wars and virulent attacks on education and teachers. Right now in the state of South Carolina, in the state legislature, a bill titled the Parental Rights Act could very well pass. It has already passed the House 116-1. And it's on the way to the House, to the state Senate, giving parents the ability to sue teachers if they can prove that they acted maliciously in an environment that has been so vituperative and that has been so vicious for teachers, backed by conservative voices that have gotten onto school boards and that are virulent and vehement and persistent in their tirade against the teachers. Think about what this legislation means and the ramifications. I mean, think about what this means in the fearful environment that it will enhance for already petrified teachers. This effectively degrades teachers and exacerbates a situation that has already led to a mass exodus in teachers across the nation. And another dangerous aspect of this is letting people with no formal background in education become teachers. But that's what South Carolina is doing. You can now become a teacher without the proper certification and training. So if you have a degree in history, for example, you can just become a teacher, even though you've had no formal training. There's a book by the former president of the AFT. It's by Randy Weingarten. It's called Why Fascists Fear Teachers: Public Education and the Future of Democracy. I'm just going to read to you like That's from the inside here. It reads here, quote, attacks on schools and teachers have long been a hallmark of fascist regimes. Throughout history, as many dictators rose to power, they began banning books and controlling curriculum. Fascists fear teachers because teachers foster an educated and empowered population that can see past propaganda and scare tactics. Fascists fear teachers because they teach young people how to think for themselves. Even if you don't read the whole book, that's just enough right there. We are in a moment right now in society, in this country, where there is a concerted effort to attack education in this country. And it's important to center this and to give full context to the story. That's why I started with the Reagan example, because this isn't recent history and the fact that this just started this decade. It goes back. It goes back in terms of the attack on education, the attack on universities, even going back as far as the Nixon administration. This is a concerted, persistent effort by conservatives on the right to ensure that the way that the public education system is recalibrated in a way that benefits them. To make it designed in a way where students are set up for failure. To make it designed in a way where students are being deceived. They're not exactly taught by career professionals, but by people who got their degrees in 6 months. It's important to understand how fascism is having a detrimental role on education and educators right now. And as we navigate that, the best way to counter that, at least democratically, is by electing new people. And right now, here in the state of South Carolina, voters are who no longer want to deal with Ellen Weaver as their state superintendent of education. They will now be able to vote her out. And one of the Democratic candidates running to replace Weaver is Sylvia Wright. And contrary to her opponent, she actually has 3 master's degrees, and she actually took the time to complete each one. She has a lengthy resume of professional educational experience and is currently working on her Doctor of Education at the University of South Carolina. She's the author of How I Survived the First 5 Years of Teaching and is in the process of working on another book. Sylvia was born and raised in North Charleston, South Carolina. Her father served in the Air Force and her mother was a customer service agent for Southern Bell. She said from a young age, she was taught how essential it was to serve in the community and give back. She is not only a teacher, but a military spouse, a parent, and a grandmother. She is running to restore hope for students, teachers, schools, districts, and the state as it pertains to education. She is a highly impressive candidate and has a primary election coming up against her Democratic rival on June 9th. That is when that primary election will take place. If she is victorious in the primary election in November, she will face off against Ellen Weaver in the general election to become the next state superintendent of education. One of her former colleagues spoke fondly of her in their endorsement, quote, teachers come to her with their concerns and frustrations as she always has a compassionate ear and a positive attitude. Sylvia has definitely seen firsthand the effects of poor leadership and has a wonderful vision for what needs to change both inside and outside the classroom. As an educator of 27 years, I fully support Sylvia Wright to be our guiding force in Columbia. End quote. I spoke with Sylvia Wright last Friday for an interview here on the Jeremiah Patterson Show, as we are facing so much as a nation and also so much as a state here in South Carolina. This was our discussion. Joining me now for the interview is Sylvia Wright. She is a candidate for South Carolina Superintendent of Education. Thank you so very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You said that growing up, you tried to fit into school, but grew to learn that you were unique and remarkable in your own way. How did that inspire you to enter public education?
Well, I want to back up and talk a little bit about talk a little bit about that because when I was in middle school, trying to fit in, being a military kid because my dad was in the Air Force. And so, whenever we moved, I had to learn, how to fit in, how to adjust. And so within that, I didn't know who I was as a person because I was always trying to, fit in. But as I got older, I realized that I don't have to try to fit in. I can just be me. And if I'm just me, then I can attract people, who, like me for who I am, not trying to, impress people. So I preface that because as a teacher, as an educator, I take that and I use those stories as I mentor students. I let them know that they don't have to try to be someone else because what they see now is like not the finished product, but someone who's been through what they're going through and can, tell them, hey, you don't have to be this way. I know from experience how you feel, but I'm telling you, looking at me now, you don't have to try to be someone else. You can just be you, and people will like you for who you are. So, to answer your question, it's more about I use my story, my past, to help mentor uh, students and teachers.
Wow, wow, that's
Yeah.
definitely very impactful. You have a highly impressive resume that includes three master's degrees, an amalgamation of professional educational experience, and you're currently working on your Doctor of Education at the
Mhm.
University of South Carolina. You're the author of How I Survived the First 5 Years of Teaching, and you're also currently working on another book, which I do hear is on pause because you're
Yeah.
campaigning, of course. um,
Yes.
in contrast with your opponent, who proudly states that she obtained her master's degree in 6 months, is pro MAGA and has advocated for private schools over public schools. What is your message to voters who see that stark difference, and why did you decide to run for this position to sort of counter that, but also bring some real educational experience to this office?
Okay, so you had two questions there. The first one was explain how I'm different than the current superintendent. What difference do I bring?
Yes, ma'am.
Um, and then the second question was my why for running. Okay. Can I start with my why for running and then
Absolutely.
okay. So my why for running is I'm a grandmother and my grandson will be entering into public schools in about 2 years. And I've been an educator. I've been a classroom teacher, department leader. Um, I guess I'm also answering this first one as well into it. Department leader, instructional coach, school coordinator, district coordinator. And that allowed me to see our public school system on multiple levels. I've seen it at the classroom level, school level, and district level. So I see the weaknesses in the system, and I know for my grandson that what some of the things that I witnessed, I do not want for him, and what and I want better. So the the school or the educational experience that I want for my grandson is what I want for every kid in South Carolina because they deserve it. And we have the funding and the programs to do right, to do better for our kids. Because 43rd in education is not enough. We can go from 43rd to first with working together with the right leadership. And that's takes me into your next question. So my why, my grandson, and the difference between me and the current state superintendent of education. So the first thing would be being in the classroom, being in the school system. My opponent was never a teacher, never worked in the school system. And how do you know exactly what's going on in the school system when you've never been there to see? Because it's different when you walk through and do like a photo op. But when
Yeah.
you've really lived it in the trenches, like I've lived it on all three levels. The other thing to that, being able to work on the school level and district level and having that classroom experience, it speaks to the fact that it brings a perspective. There's a different perspective at each level that I feel is very important to the role of state superintendent of education, because it allows me to know it, like that knowledge of the importance of building relationships. Because when people get into these leadership positions, it's more of, here, do this, right? But when you're telling people to do that as a leader and not in this current superintendent's position, she doesn't have that perspective of the teacher. Like, how is it going to affect the teacher? How's it going to affect the student, the school? And so, with my experience, I've lived this. So that allows me a different perspective as I approach, the strategy for how we improve South Carolina from 43rd to 1st. So that's a big part of my plan to collaborate with everyone. We need to talk to students. We need to talk to teachers. We need to talk to the families, the parents, the community. How can we all work together to truly elevate education in South Carolina? Because it doesn't lie on one person. It doesn't just lie on the parent because people want to blame the parent. It doesn't just lie on the teacher. People want to blame the teacher. No, it's going to take all of us working together.
When it comes to vouchers and essentially prioritizing private schools over public schools, I know one thing that you've been in favor of is essentially regulating the way that private schools operate, in which, of course, they're already being shown preferential treatment under the current superintendent. How would you go about that regulation process and ensuring that there is equality between, both school structures?
Thank you for that question about private schools, because I'm sure you've seen the latest news too with the whole voucher system. Like, money's being wasted. There's no oversight. And homeschool students are receiving these vouchers, and which was not the intent of the bill. But the key thing that I want to bring up before any of that, I should have mentioned, it's against our state constitution to send public funds to private religious institutions. Article 11, Section 4 tells us that. And this voucher bill was ruled unconstitutional in 24, but the current majority, they reworked and created a new bill. It just hasn't been challenged yet. So if a party, and when I say a party, I mean like individuals who want to challenge this in court, if they bring it to court, it has a chance of being ruled unconstitutional again. And then that takes away the whole voucher program because it's ruled unconstitutional. But one of the key things that I want to say as well, I don't have a problem with parents having a choice. They can choose wherever they want to send their kid. The issue is, like I said with our Constitution, public funds should not be used in private institutions for private schools. And I want to highlight why the law was even created in the first place, because during segregation, that's what happened. Instead of funding public schools, private schools were funded. And so it left the students who couldn't pay without access to education. So in order to rectify that, to make it right, this was a safeguard. So what my plan is to fully fund public schools. That's going to be my focus.
Ellen Weaver, the current superintendent of education, has been pictured with Lindsay Burke, the author of Project
Mm.
2025's education section. She also is very supportive of Linda McMahon, the Secretary of Education, who is in favor of shutting down the Department of Education. As someone who's running for this position, how do you wrestle with the fact that our current superintendent of education is working with the forces who are trying to eviscerate the Department of Education and make it more difficult for our children to learn.
Thank you. So I guess you're asking me what my view is of her partnerships with Linda McMahon and Lindsey Burke.
Yes.
So to highlight that, this is all a part of Project 2025. And when you talk about taking away that access, um, I think of students with special needs, because one of the plans for Project 2025 is for block grants to come down. And I know it might sound good, but what that means is those protections that were in place with the money right now, money's in buckets, okay? And those are protected buckets. So special education, they get a certain protection. They get this money. With the block grants, there's no protections. So if they don't want to spend money, if the people in charge don't want to spend money on special education, they don't have to. My my concern with her partnerships, like your question is saying, it's focused on Project 2025, and it's taken away those protections that our kids need to be successful in school. So how I plan to counter that is by educating people and letting them know the alternative. Because if we continue down this route, because again, these partners, the current state superintendent is for Project 2025. And like I just highlighted, how one example of how it's going to affect students with special needs. And that's not the only group of students, but I just wanted to highlight that. If we continue down this route, then, well, with the current state superintendent of education, then we are going to find ourselves in a situation where certain kids will receive an education and certain kids won't. And like I told a group the other night, this isn't about black and white. This is about have and have not. So it's very important that everybody knows the alternative. They know if we continue down this route, what's going to happen. But my vision is to elevate all students. And that would be the difference between my vision to elevate all students and improve education from 43rd to 1st, or the current superintendent's route of making education exclusive and that have not divide.
I think it's so interesting as it speaks to the time that we're in, that someone with no professional educational experience is the current superintendent. And I know that you are someone, of course, that has, been in the school system for a very long time. So when it comes to your campaign initiatives and, of course, the way that they were crafted, how was that process? I'm sure it was pretty easy. Of course, you're a former teacher yourself. So what was that like, and how do you intend to bring that, into your public policy if elected?
Thank you. I love that question because, like you said, it was easier for me because I created it based on what I've seen. For example, early childhood education is one of my top priorities. That's actually something that I want to be known for, you know, like improving in South Carolina. But one thing that I noticed is kids would come to kindergarten and they wouldn't know numbers, they wouldn't know colors. So they're already starting off at a disadvantage. And so that had me thinking, how can we do better by the students before they get to kindergarten? And so that type of thinking is, and I can go into more of early childhood education, but that's basically like the foundation. I saw that there was a need for when they come to kindergarten, and we need to reach them before they get to kindergarten. And that's the importance of that early childhood access to early childhood education in every county. And then another priority is like improving teacher working conditions, teacher pay. Um, and I know firsthand how teachers are feeling because you feel like it's like being on a hamster wheel is how I explain it. And I didn't really understand that hamster wheel analogy until I actually got out of the classroom, and then eventually, was at the district office. But as a teacher, I was constantly going, like grading papers, doing lessons, helping a student. Like, it was constantly nonstop. And then even in the summer, I was doing things trying to prepare for the next year. I was in trainings. I never stopped. Making sure we're improving. How we need to have those conversations though with teachers and look at the technology that we have, and how can we reduce the load on teachers. How can we also, and this goes to curriculum too, which is one of my priorities, how can we shift that load to the students and put them more in control of their learning through individualized learning plans. And we have the technology to do this, to create that individualized learning, so that way students can not only have those individualized learning plans, but we have project-based learning. We have a curriculum that allows students to do innovative problem solving and critical thinking. I want to merge the career exploration with your basic instructional skills, because students are bored in the class. And so they're bored because they're not engaged. So they've got to see that, first of all, what they're learning is relevant. And secondly, we're engaging them and we get them thinking. And the key thing too with the curriculum that I envision with that career piece is, if we expose kids to the curriculum or to careers, what's available to them in elementary, middle school, by the time they get to high school in ninth grade, instead of them, trying things out and, wasting that 4 years, they've already had like exposure. So now they can choose. In ninth grade, we can truly put them on a pathway to success. So those are a few things.
You've said that when it comes to children, um, what happens in the community, at home, and at school, it is not separate. It is all interconnected. And it
Mhm.
definitely relates to how they are behaving in the classroom, which I feel is a very important correlation that many people miss. Can you just speak a little bit about that for a second?
Sure. So that is my whole child approach, is what you're referencing. And I don't know if you've heard of communities in schools.
No, I have not.
Okay, no problem. So I was introduced to that in Charleston County. So if a student did not have a uniform, the communities in schools, there was a representative there who came every day. She had her own little classroom and everything. We would send kids there if they didn't have uniform. If kids didn't have food, they got food bags. Or if we knew of families who maybe needed food or whatever, they would get a food bag on the weekend. Um, and of course, she still had the food to help provide. But and the other thing is, there was I'll never forget, there was like a big RV looking medical bus that would come and give appointments. There were kids would get cleanings. I remember they would be set up in a room where they would do cleanings. But I say all that because that's how we can get the community involved, providing the needs of what the outside needs. That way the students are taken care of on the outside, so that way they can come to school and they're ready to learn. Because if we're not connecting with the family, finding out what's the issue. For example, we have high truancy, chronic absenteeism is an issue right now. So if we find out what the needs are, for example, I was working with a family that was homeless. Okay. And she was telling me how she had to appear in front of like a board because her kids were truant, or they were constantly absent more than such and such days. And so I'm sitting with this family as their whole life is on a hotel cart. Okay. She had to move hotels every 2 to 3 days. So If she didn't send her kids to school, it wasn't because she didn't want to. It was because she didn't know where she was going to be for them to return to her. And that's one of my issues with this is if we don't know what's happening, we need to get to the bottom of why the kids are truant. And if it's homelessness, what systems do we have in place to support these families? And that's where the community is involved. The school plays a part too, because that was the red alert. That was the red flag. The kids not coming to school, they're truant. They're chronic absenteeism. All right. So then how can we work with the parent and bring in those community resources to make sure we're supporting this family so the kids can come to school and learn? Because that, at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want kids in the class learning. That way they can be successful. And again, they're on that pathway to opportunity.
That is definitely something that is, I mean, it happens more so than is told. It is definitely something that I'm sure many people can relate to as is affecting the way that you just operate in a classroom setting, you know, not
Mm-hmm.
knowing where your next meal is going to come from. You know, perhaps lunch or breakfast at school is the only meal that you're going to get, or not knowing where you're going to return to for the evening
That's right.
to have a place to sleep.
That's right.
So I mean, this is definitely there. I mean, I what I'm noticing in this interview, and of course, having done my research on you, is the empathy factor, which
Mm,
I do believe is going to be, you know, very powerful, but also uh, connecting for a lot of people in having that as a superintendent. Which I feel like some people, when they elect people, you know, to positions of power, especially, you know, when it comes to politics, they think that there's such this distant relationship. But you yourself have been embedded in the community for so long, so you're not a stranger
that's
to
right.
that type of, you know, interpersonal relationships.
Yep. I think that plays to the fact that I'm a teacher. Like with teachers, that's what we do. We love, we care, we have, it's innate in us. And so, I can't help it.
I wanted to ask you here, what steps do you believe should be taken to sort of recalibrate the school system in a way that prepares students for life, rather than having a strong emphasis on grades and standardized testing?
Thank you. Thank you for that. The biggest thing for me, number one, is we need to focus on growth instead of like SC Ready is like an end of the year test, for example, right? But we don't get that data until the kids are in the next grade level. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of that. That way we can actually focus on growth instead of this testing culture where the teacher is focused on making sure the kids only know what's needed to pass a test. Because once we step away from that, then that allows the teacher to um, have more, I don't want to say leniency, I'm looking for another word, like more freedom to allow the students to think on their own. Because I will tell you, as a teacher who's had to give a test, we care so much about our kids passing that test, not only because, we want our name to look good, is because this test makes our kids look good. So that's that driving force of trying to force feed the answers to the kids. It's not because we just want to teach the test. It's because we want to make sure our kids look good and we want to make sure we look good in our school and all of that. But that's the pressure of the standardized testing. So let's take that out of the picture. Now we still have testing, but it'll be more of a growth model. So I use like iReady. I don't know if you're familiar with that. But middle schools use iReady or some form of iReady where they give a test at the beginning of the year, middle of the year, and the end of the year. And with this, we look at growth. It gives us a report. Where are the weaknesses and the strengths? And we can build on top of each. We can play on each. How can we lift up, elevate or enrich their strengths? And then also, how can we elevate, support them, their weaknesses to help them improve that? So that's my proposal for how we can start to shift the mindset in our schools, the culture in our schools, more of a growth culture, more of a supportive culture, um, to really help. prepare students. And after we, again, focus on this growth, focus on, like I said earlier, elevating or infusing career exploration with these basic instructional skills where students can see like the significance, the relevance of what they're learning, like real world, hands-on, project-based learning. And then they get to high school, and what I envision for high school is, because we have the apprenticeships, internships, of course we'll have our college track or our military track. But kids will have these multiple pathways that they can go into, and they've already had exposure, which makes it easier for them to kind of decide. Now, I'm not saying they have to be locked in at ninth grade. There's still flexibility, but it won't be as haphazard as it is now, and it won't be as limited as it is now. Um, so that's sort of my vision for like just improving the educational experience for all kids.
I notice there is a lot of strategizing, but also legitimate concern and, of course, empathy that I've been talking about when it comes to you. When you are campaigning, and of course, as you're in this race, and even before launching your campaign, what has kept you up at night most when it comes to thinking about the current education system and just all of the children that you're advocating for?
That's a deep question for me. Because like you said, I do care so much about what is happening right now in education. And I think what really keeps me up at night is the fact that we have kids who are being neglected and people don't even know. Like, I've seen it, um, but it's worse than what I've seen, what I've experienced. I've watched a school district close an entire elementary school without telling the parents, without telling the community. They just shifted these kids to another school at the end of the school year. And then I drive by and I see a new elementary school right outside of my subdivision being built for the kids in this neighborhood. But yet those kids lost their elementary, they lost their community school, and no one stood up for that. So what keeps me up is this fight to make sure all kids get what they deserve, and they're not treated like that. And that's just one example. I have many examples, but that's one of the ones that really fires me up because that's a nice elementary school that they're building right there. But what about those kids in that rural community who just lost their community school?
When it comes to teachers, I know one of the things that you have advocated for on your platform, which I'm sure teachers will be very jubilant about, is compensating teachers and staff for meetings before and after school, which is outside of their contracted time. Teachers are some of the most valiant and perseverant workers we have in society.
Hmm.
And we've often seen, like, even from the student perspective, you'll often see sort of like the stress factor that exists within teachers, of course. And it's not necessarily directed at students, but something that, they're dealing with.
Hmm.
But also sort of like that stress to sort of really do the best and to be the best for their students because they care so much. And a lot of that time is devoted to either before school or after school outside of their contracted time. Can you talk a little bit about what went into sort of creating that proposal and why you believe that's so important?
Okay, thank you. So the reason why thought about making sure we compensate teachers before and after school for the meetings. So as a teacher, I remember, having to do that, and it was in your contract, so, you had to do it. So I didn't think twice about it. But as I moved up in leadership, as a district coordinator, one of my jobs was to give instructional or professional development, right? And so my professional development focused on like instructional strategies, how to get students more engaged in the class. And one morning, as I was giving, this um, my professional development, it was at a high school, and I spoke to the high school teacher, and he was telling me how they didn't have to be at school until a certain amount of time, but they had to come in early to come to the meeting. And so that's when I was like, well, that's not fair because they're here before their contracted hours, but they're coming in earlier to do this because, you know, I guess that's as duties assigned. So why not pay them for coming in to say, hey, thank you for your time. We value your time. And so that's why that's important to me, making sure that we show them that they're valued, that their time is valuable. So that's sort of my basis behind that pay.
When it comes to parents' rights, I know this is something that we've been seeing recently where it is sort of sponsored by the right in a way. I mean, the Heritage Foundation, as you've talked about, has noted that they're embracing culture wars to make school choice more successful. Of course, parents' rights, it's sort of like a tricky thing in the way that it's delineated now. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, parents do have a right to understand, what their children are learning in school. But what's been happening in recently in this decade is that it's shifted in a way that's sort of like more draconian and authoritative, trying to control what teachers are able to teach and how they're able to teach it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how that's not only concerning as a teacher but also someone who's running to be the superintendent of education, how that's a major issue.
Yes, sir. So thank you, because parents' rights are very important to me. Because I'm a parent and grandparent, so I get it. You want what's best for your kids. You want to make sure like they are in the best learning environment possible. But my issue with what's happening is it's not really about all parents' rights. We're talking about a special interest group that they feel like they want to control everything within the school. They want to control what the teachers are doing. And there's even this false narrative that, teachers are teaching like gender ideology, all these things to try to scare people. But what they don't realize is we don't have time for that. As classroom teachers, we have curriculum, we have standards that we have to cover. So this whole narrative that's being created by this small group to try to say like the parents need the right to, you know, make sure that they're always seeing what the teacher's doing, it's just a false narrative. And again, it's that fear factor that, the current state superintendent and that interest group that they're trying to create. But the concerning part of all of this is that they're going to be allowed, because there's a bill right now, well, I think it just got approved. um Forgive me because I usually have the numbers of the bill, but this bill would allow the parents to sue teachers. So that's part of my concern with this whole push for parents' rights, which again, parents already have the right. They already have rights, but this hyper push of parents' rights is more, I see, as an attack on education. It's an attack on our teachers. This is what's going to cause teachers to leave the classroom. But again, if we talk about Project 2025, the whole purpose is to dismantle public education. So, what better way to dismantle it than to make sure teachers are uncomfortable, that they, not really uncomfortable, just they feel disrespected. That teachers are not respected, And like I said earlier, we love what we do. That's why we do it. Yeah, we need more pay, but for a true teacher, true educator, and again, yes, pay is good, but that's not why we do it. We do it because we care. We do it because we make a difference. We do it because we know our impact. And to be constantly disrespected, to have this group say parents' rights, and to constantly try to micromanage teachers and point the finger and try to make us look bad, like we are the enemy when we're not. That's my biggest concern with this whole push of parents' rights. And again, I want to highlight parents already have rights. This is something different.
I think when you speak about it in that perspective, it definitely makes sense in terms of how it's even more disconcerting for the goal to have teachers leave in mass exodus. So then you can
Mhm.
then replace those individuals with people who are not actual experts in their fields or do not have actual professional degrees in becoming
Mhm.
teachers and, of course, educating the next generation in a way that is deceptive. That
Mhm.
is definitely deeply concerning.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, sir. That is true. You hit the nail on the head with that because you bring up what you just said. There's actually a bill that passed where people don't have to have a education certification. They don't have to
Hmm.
be like if you have a master or a degree in math, you can be a teacher. You don't have classroom management skills, um, but you can be a teacher. You're not formally trained um, with lesson planning. There's so much more that goes into teaching. And that's my biggest issue because I was actually in the committee meeting when they were discussing that making when they were discussing people being teachers who did not have certification. Like, oh, they have a degree in such and such, but they're missing the whole point. It's not just about being educated because you can be the most educated person, but when you go into a classroom, especially a middle school classroom, and if they don't like you, they gonna let you know. They don't care how many degrees you have. I love my middle schoolers. They will be honest with you. If you want to know the truth, like elementary definitely will be honest, but they'll be honest in a cute way. Middle schoolers, they will hurt your feelings and not think twice about it. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
I wanted to ask you here, when it comes to you running this race, what have you been hearing from the community? Has there been excitement, but also intrigue surrounding your campaign?
Yes. So this journey, this on the campaign trail, has been so enlightening for me because I'm meeting so many different people, and I hear, "I'm proud of you." One, there was two places that I went where one guy told me, and this is a little sensitive for me, but he said, "I know what you're doing, and I know your efforts." He said, "This is where I was hit in the head with a billy club when he was protesting during the civil rights movement." And he was like, he pointed and he was like, "No, touch." And so I touched it, and there's a lump. It's still there. And this man, you know, was an older gentleman, but he still has the lump from when he was hit in the head with a billy club during the civil rights movement, you know? So I think of that. Um, I think back on one lady, I was in a rural town, and I was at a festival or something, but she was talking about education, just she was mad about what was happening in that rural area, as she should be. And so I gave her my card, and she looked at it. She was like, "You're running for state superintendent of education of the whole state?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she looked at my card again, and she started crying. Yeah. And that stayed with me because it was a cry of, you know, relief and joy. Like there's actually a chance that things can be different. It was that kind of cry. And that stayed with me. And I'll never forget that. So just knowing that there are shoulders, and I do not take this lightly. There are shoulders that I'm standing on as I run for this position, as I run to make education accessible to all kids, to give all kids a fair shot, a fair chance at, you know, having a brighter future, having that access to or that pathway to opportunity. all kids. So I'm very excited about this journey.
Oh, that's definitely a that's a perfect segue into my last question here. Um, what ignites your faith and persistence?
Mm.
Your faith and your persistent spirit as you aspire to win this race.
So I was sitting right here in this office when I started looking up private schools for my grandson, private preschools, because he had just turned 1 years old, and I was like, well, like I said, I want the best education for my grandson. But as I was looking up these private preschools, I felt a conviction. And this conviction was so deep that I sat back in my chair like this. And that's when it was like, okay, what about the other kids? That's what came to my mind. What about the other kids? And I was like, okay, okay, Lord, well, what would you have me to do? And that's when the state superintendent position came to my mind, because as a teacher, I never thought that I could be this top state superintendent of education. My goal was to be at the district office. That was my goal. I wanted to work in the district office and like be a coordinator. But I say that because I know my mission. I know what I've been called to do. And so nothing is going to stop me from doing that. Now, do I have challenges and barriers? Yes. Every day. Every day. But but I know my mission. I know what I've been called to do. And so that's what keeps me going.
Absolutely remarkable and inspirational. Again, my guest is Sylvia Wright. She's a candidate for South Carolina's Superintendent of Education. To learn more about her campaign, please be sure to visit her website, wright2026sc.com. Sylvia, thank you so much again for appearing on the show, and Godspeed with your campaign.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Once again, that was my interview with Sylvia Wright. Again, she is running to be the next state superintendent here in South Carolina, the next state superintendent of education. Of course, her opponent in this race, she is set to face her in the June 9th primary. And of course, if she is victorious in that election, she will be advanced to the general election against the Republican state superintendent of education, Ellen Weaver. So again, if you're in South Carolina and you're watching this, make sure that you are listening again to those dates. June 9th is the primary, and of course, the general election will take place in November. I appreciate your support in watching this episode as it pertains to the Rising Political Stars series that we're going to be continuing here on the show, not just interviewing candidates here in my home state of South Carolina, but also just across the country in different cities. Just getting more people on this show as the midterm elections are getting closer, and prayerfully with the state of the country that those do still transpire. I mean, it's very important to be clear-eyed about what's happening in terms of attacks on elections, but also the resistance to ensure that those free and fair elections do still happen, as I've been covering here on the show. I do want you to know that I'll be returning on camera tomorrow to release officially what is going to be a series here on the show in regards to the Epstein files. It's going to be part one, Jeffrey Epstein and the Pam Bondi connection, part one of that investigative series. And then, of course, more reports will follow talking about the Epstein files here on the show. And then, of course, Wednesday, I'm officially bringing back the TJPS Evening News Show. So please be sure that you are tuned in for that. I'm excited to officially bring that back. It's going to be airing every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern here on the show. In addition to publishing investigative reports, TJPS Evening News Show will be published. That's going to do it for this video here on the show. Please be sure to follow the Jeremiah Patterson Show on Instagram at TJPS News, on YouTube at the Jeremiah Patterson Show, and then of course you can find us on our website tjpsnews.com to support our independent journalism. Please consider donating to the show. You can also check out our Truth in Transit series as it pertains to traveling the country, the state, and of course soon the world for investigative journalism. Please also consider becoming a member of the Jeremiah Patterson Show at $7.99 a month, at $75 a year, or at $150 a year to support this show and to sustain this work as a Black independent journalist. I want to thank you all very much for watching this video, and I appreciate your support. Be sure to comment, like, and subscribe, and share this video with a friend or a family member. And I will see you again soon. Take care. Eyes open, heads up, stay focused, continue to be part of the resistance.